Hello, I'm Dr. Timothy Lewis, talking about the book The Poetics of Matthew 1. And this time I'm talking about chapter 5 of the book, where I finally get to look at solving some things. So far, I haven't really, in the previous chapters, haven't really gotten very far in terms of the, the pattern of the references to mothers. So the subtitle, The 5 References to Mothers and Other Patterns, that's something that is a big pattern that is in Matthew chapter 1, and there are other little things to get a hang of, to get a grasp of first. And so finally, by chapter 5, I'm starting to look at some patterns that are in there, because previously in chapter 4 it was all about things that aren't there, that can seem a little bit depressing. All the things in the story that we thought the story might be about, but it's not. They're not in the story, and the story's not about those things. So what is the story about? So chapter 5 is called How Joseph is Right. The Poetics of Joseph's Necessary Plan in Matthew 1 verse 19. So it's focusing on verse 19. The verse 19 has a lot of detail in the verse. It's easy to skip through and just say, oh, it's not very descriptive about Joseph. But if we wanted to look at why is it focused on Joseph, I mean, we might think, okay, there's references to mothers, some mothers along the way in the genealogy. It's a patrilineal genealogy with references to mothers. So perhaps we're now going to hear a story focusing on the child's mother, on Jesus's mother, Mary. And we're not. It's focusing on Joseph. So why is it focused on Joseph? Well, if we step back a little bit and think of, well, how is it focusing on Joseph? And particularly, what is it focusing on? What about Joseph is it focusing on? So verse 19 has a lot of detail about Joseph. And so it had already introduced Joseph in verse 16 as Mary's husband, or literally man, as Mary's man. And then again in verse 18, telling us that Joseph is the man to whom Mary is betrothed in marriage. And then so when it tells us again in verse 19 that Joseph is Mary's man, or Mary's husband, it does seem a little bit superfluous, a little bit redundant. Why is it telling us that again? And so it turns out that there are a lot of details in verse 19 that if we slow down, we can really get a lot of description about Joseph and what's going on with Joseph. And one of the issues has been the difficulty in figuring out, is Joseph doing the right thing or the wrong thing? So we have this descriptor in the text that says, yeah, Joseph is someone who does the right thing, but then often we've got an interpretation that says, yeah, but he's not doing the right thing, is he? He's not doing the right thing. Hang on. But why does it say he's someone who does the right thing if he's planning to do something that's not the right thing? So there seems to be a little bit of a problem. And so chapter 5 really gets into that problem and unpacking verse 19. And it turns out that when it says Joseph is dikaios, a right acting man, this is actually a reference to being inculpable, in terms of innocent, in terms of not being like other men. It basically means he's not doing what you would expect other men to do in his situation. So another man in Joseph's situation, he would have either said something about what he knows that he's not the father of the child, and it said something that would end up shaming Mary, or he would another man would have not said anything at all, and just claim the child, just pretended to be the child's father, knowing that he's not rightfully, legally supposed to be doing that. In his day, it was important to know who is the child's father rightfully, like legally, who has the legal claim to the child. Joseph knows that it's not him, so is he going to say something and make it worse for Mary, or is he not going to say anything and make it better for himself, so he can just claim the child as his own? But that wouldn't be right. He couldn't rightfully claim the child as his own, knowing what he knows, but he can't say what he knows. So it's quite a dilemma. This is the dilemma, and it's taken scholars a long time to figure out, hang on, what is the dilemma? And so I think that chapter 5 of the book goes a long way towards figuring out what is the dilemma that Joseph is facing. And it really helps to understand this word dikaios, righteous or right acting. And so I compare it with other times it occurs in Matthew. So to get a definition of righteous, we could just go anywhere. Other references to righteousness and right and dikaios is used elsewhere in the New Testament, but different writers might be using it slightly different ways with different purposes. So we really need to go to Matthew if we want to know what does it mean in Matthew, and also how is it applied to a person. So there are not a lot of cases where this descriptor is applied to another, to a particular person, a named person. So Joseph is a named person. So there are often references to righteousness, or the righteous ones, the person who receives a righteous one. But it's not a named person in those cases. So there are two other cases later on in Matthew where it's used for a named person. So I look at those two cases in the case of Abel and in the case of Jesus, when Pilate's wife refers to Jesus as that righteous man. In both of those cases, it means innocent. Talking about Abel's innocent blood that was shed. He was not culpable for that. He didn't cause that. He didn't rile up his brother. He wasn't responsible for that. Cain killed Abel. Cain was responsible for doing that. It wasn't because of Abel. So Abel is innocent. He's inculpable of that crime that was committed against him. And similarly, Pilate's wife is saying the same thing about Jesus. That innocent man, it means innocent. And interestingly, in the two occurrences prior to Matthew, in previous scriptures, there are only two, which is very surprising. We might expect that there might be other named characters in the scriptures who are called dikaios, or righteous, Zedek. A righteous person, yes, in general is mentioned, but there are only two characters who are named as righteous. So Noah and Job. Noah and Job are both said to be, each of those a righteous man. But it means innocent in both of those cases, in terms of they're not doing what other people expect other men to be doing at the time. So Noah is not doing what other men are doing at his time. He is innocent of those crimes that all the other men seem to be committing, but he is not. Similarly with Job, Job's friends think that he is guilty of doing what other men presumably do. But Job's not like other men. You can't just take the usual assumptions and apply it to either of these cases. So yes, I look particularly at that word, but all the descriptors in verse 19 are really quite helpful. And yeah, there's a lot more in the chapter. Even though it's not a long chapter, it's packed full of really interesting analysis of all the descriptors in verse 19. And Yeah, so that's for chapter 5 of the Poetics of Matthew 1.